The Supreme Federal Court also scheduled the trial of Eduardo Bolsonaro. I even mentioned to you that Eduardo Bolsonaro was going to be convicted this month before the recess of the judiciary now in July. Eduardo Bolsonaro, I told you he will be convicted. What happens? Eduardo Bolsonaro was charged by the Prosecutor General's Office for the crime of coercion during the course of the process, combined with Article 71 of the Penal Code, which is the continued offense, where when this happens, the person can be charged with up to 7 crimes of the same kind. Obviously, the sentences are not added together, but there is an increase of 2/3, right? And there can still be aggravating factors, which increase it by 1/3. With that, I believe he will get more than 8 years in prison. I believe he will get almost 9 years in prison, which will impose necessarily the initial closed regime for serving the sentence. More than 8 years, the initial sentence regime is closed, and he will be convicted for the crime of coercion during the course of the process, combined with continued criminal conduct. That was when he went to the United States and started attacking the Supreme Federal Court, trying to intimidate and coerce. That whole situation with the tariff hike, that situation with the suspension of visas for authorities, even to this day, the visa of the Attorney General is suspended for the United States, as well as those of 8 Supreme Federal Court justices. They are still suspended. And all of this, he himself produced the evidence against him, which is even still on his social media to this day, in which he spoke, threatened, and said that if his father were tried, if his father were convicted, Bolsonaro, right, who was sentenced to 27 years and 3 months in prison, that they would be arrested, right? Actually, Eduardo Bolsonaro resigned from his office here in Brazil, where he had a salary of almost 50,000 reais. Today we know, at least in part, apparently, why. It was because he had a few million reais there, right, from Daniel Vocaro, which went to the fund there in the United States, in Texas, which is exactly where Eduardo Bolsonaro lives. And he lives very well, thank you, in a 6 million reais house in the United States and lives a rich life, doesn't he? He left everything here because he knew about this little privilege. By the way, I believe he even did it on purpose, as my grandmother used to say, in the following sense. They needed someone to receive and launder the money in the United States. And who would be someone from the same family? Because it's many millions that Daniel Vocaro sent to the United States, isn't it? So like this, he will answer to this case. Then you might say, Andrea Gonçalves, but he's in the United States. That doesn't stop it, does it? He will very likely be, and in fact has already been, summoned by public notice. And the entire process was handled by the Federal Public Defender's Office. Since he did not appoint a lawyer in the case records, Alexander de Moraes then called the Public Defender's Office, which acted as his defense. And what will the verdict be? I believe that unanimously he will be convicted and that he will get almost 9 years in prison. And soon he will be considered a fugitive. His name should be placed on the Interpol list and his extradition should be requested from the United States. Obviously, he has millions and millions of reais there in the United States today. He should request political asylum just like Alexandre Ramagem. Alexandre Ramagem also filed for political asylum in the United States so he wouldn't be arrested and extradited. Obviously, we know that the owner of the junk is covering up for these coup plotters. And from all indications, in exchange for privileged information, including classified information, which puts our sovereignty at risk. Since Alexandre Ramagem was the general director of the Brazilian intelligence agency, where public servants are Brazil's secret agents. And he has sensitive information related to the defense of our sovereignty. Obviously, there is some shielding regarding Alexandre Ramagem and also regarding Eduardo Bolsonaro himself. Because for sure they are acting as spies and they are acting as traitors to the country, aren't they? Both of them in the United States, Alexandre Ramagem and Eduardo Bolsonaro, and Flavio Bolsonaro here in Brazil, pretending to be patriots. But in reality, they work and conspire and try to overthrow the Brazilian government because for them, the worse things get, the better, because anything goes. After all, if we end up with a scorched earth scenario, at least they'll feel avenged, avenged and with a lot of money in their pockets, right? We don't really know the whole issue very well. Flavio Bolsonaro was in the United States asking for the Red Command and the criminal organizations in Brazil to be declared terrorists, right? And the Trump administration even made it official and declared the PCC and the Red Command as terrorist organizations. Obviously, the PCC and Comando Vermelho have to be destroyed, right? They have to be eliminated. In Brazil, not just them, but also the militias and all criminal organizations. Everyone, I think, agrees unanimously that they have to be destroyed, right? But what kind of state situation do soberano, sovereign, foreign, sovereign in its own territory is to declare this situation? In the case of the United States, we know that the goal is not to put an end to these criminal organizations. We know that the goal is to try to interfere in Brazil, to take advantage of Brazil, to gain access to rare earths, to gain access to our oil, in short, to gain access to our wealth, right? This is just a subterfuge to try to intimidate, interfere with, and coerce our government, Lula's government. That's what they want, isn't it? Because it doesn't make sense. It weakens the federal police itself, doesn't it? Because the issue of public security today stops being a matter of public security and becomes a military issue under the influence of a foreign government in the United States, where, according to their legislation, they can even interfere, impose sanctions, or even intervene militarily in Brazil. Isn't that right? And we know that Donald Trump doesn't want to solve any of this, because if he wanted to solve it, he would have already solved it in his own country. And he can't even do it in his own country. And the Bolsonaro family, right? They support this kind of situation, don't they? They act like infiltrators, like secret agents of the CIA from the United States here, trying to sabotage us, trying with the tariff issue, the PIX issue. Did you see the PIX issue? Where Eduardo Bolsonaro said he could negotiate that thing called Zelle over there, right? Because in the United States, there's a system called Zelle. The Zelle over there, guys, is just like DOC. It was just like DOC here in Brazil. Do you remember? It's a matter of banks. It's a matter of private institutions where they can charge fees and all that. Then Eduardo Bolsonaro went on social media and said that the government could give up PIX, right? And negotiate and bring in Zelle. No, no, that didn't go over well. It didn't go over well, you know? It didn't go over well because, like, one thing has nothing to do with the other. PIX is ours, guys. Write it down. PIX belongs to Brazilians. PIX is instant. We don't pay anything for PIX. Who wants to go back to systems like DOC, where you have to pay, like TED, where you have to pay? Nobody wants that. And we also know that Donald Tranquera is worried about PIX because he wants to defend the brands, the American brand credit cards. They lost a lot of ground in Brazil once we were able to make transactions for free through PIX, right? So it's hard for us to believe that the Bolsonaro family is patriotic, right? From what everything indicates, they are actually traitors to the country. And what do they want? To return to power at any cost and by any means. That's what they want, isn't it? Even if it means leaving a scorched earth behind, right? And you tell it or I tell it, they are not coming back. They're not. Flavio won't win. No. I've told you this from the beginning, and now I say it with even more certainty. Flavio is just dropping, sliding in the polls. And obviously, there's still a lot to be revealed about Flavio. Everyone knows that wherever Flavio gets involved, there's a scheme. And obviously, we can't just air all the dirty laundry right now, can we? Flavio needs to register his candidacy. Because after the candidacy is registered, then you'll see. And the Bolsonaro family chose, by all indications, the most corrupt son to run for president. The candidacy registration is until August 15th. It starts in July and goes until the last day. August 15th is the last day for candidacy registration. If you think we don't want Flavio, you're very mistaken. The left, the progressive camp, wants Flavio. That's right. It would be really important to defeat Bolsonaro again. Bolsonaro was defeated in the 2022 election. And it would be really important if we could defeat him even more, as Flavio himself said, for the blood. To make it very clear, not only internally here within the national territory that we don't want Bolsonaro anymore, but also to make it very clear internationally that the Bolsonaro family are not welcome. And that the Brazilian people, the vast majority, 80% of the population, are people, are workers, and they don't want Flavio Bolsonaro. They don't want the Bolsonaro family anymore. And besides that, the pedagogical effect of the mask falling will be very important. And for everything to come to light, because everything will come to light. This issue that just came out about Daniel Vorcaro is just a taste of what's coming ahead. No, and you say, Andrea Gonçalves, but can Flavio withdraw his candidacy registration? Yes, he can. He can withdraw. Until the 15th, he can withdraw his registration for the presidential candidacy and run, for example, for the Senate or even for federal deputy. And very possibly in those two areas, he would win. He wins. And we want him to continue as president, as a presidential candidate. For what? To get beaten by Lula. On credit, on debit, and on PIX, right, Nicholas? That's what we want. Defeat Bolsonaro even more. To clarify who the Bolsonaro family is, so now we have Bolsonaro sentenced to 27 years and 3 months. Soon we'll have Eduardo Bolsonaro sentenced to almost 9 years. And Flavio Bolsonaro next year, without a mandate, without parliamentary immunity, and with everything coming to light regarding Vorcaro, will be arrested and he will be convicted. It's that simple. That's the situation and how the Bolsonaro family operates. There's no biography. There's a criminal record. Oh. The president of the first panel of the Supreme Federal Court, Minister Flavio Dino, scheduled the trial of the criminal case against Eduardo Bolsonaro, who was impeached for coercion during the proceedings, for June 16th. And it will be another member of the Bolsonaro family impeached and ineligible. That's the situation and that's the scenario. Meanwhile, there are more plea bargains coming up. Rodrigo Bacelar. Do you remember Rodrigo Bacelar? Rodrigo Bacelar, a political ally of Flavio Bolsonaro, from the same political group as the former governor of Rio de Janeiro, Cláudio Castro, who has already been impeached and is ineligible. He was arrested, he is in jail, he is suspected of theft and embezzlement, bidding fraud, and also of involvement with the Comando Vermelho. Rodrigo Bacelar, former state deputy and former president of the Legislative Assembly of Rio de Janeiro, is negotiating a plea bargain. And he is also committing in this plea bargain agreement to return more than 300 million reais. And the Bolsonaro family is in a panic because Rodrigo Bacelar is part of the Bolsonaro family's political group. Just so you know, he was the president of the Legislative Assembly and everything was already organized. The then governor of Rio de Janeiro, Cláudio Castro, was going to step down by April 4th, right? That was the deadline for stepping down. He was going to step down to run for the Senate. Since he could no longer run for re-election as he was already serving his re-election term. Then the one who was going to take over the government of Rio de Janeiro was Rodrigo Bacelar, the one who was arrested. Rodrigo Bacelar, president of the Legislative Assembly, in the line of succession, in case the position became vacant, he would be the one to take over the government. And he already had the approval of the entire Bolsonaro group and all their political allies that he was going to be the successor, Rodrigo Bacelar. Not Rodrigo Bacelar, Cláudio Castro, governor of Rio de Janeiro. He was going to take over this interim term and he could run for governor of Rio de Janeiro, since he would then have the power in his hands. He would be the next governor of Rio de Janeiro. But they didn't count on the fact that justice and the police here would take action. He was arrested, Rodrigo Bacelar, and he's negotiating a cooperation deal. And Claudio Castro's group, which is the same government, Flavio Bolsonaro's group, they're desperate about this. Okay? And Claudio Castro was also considered impeached and ineligible by the TSC. Claudio Castro, in fact, filed an appeal. And the TSC confirmed his impeachment and ineligibility. Is an appeal still possible, Andre? Yes, an ordinary appeal can be filed with the Federal Supreme Court. The Federal Supreme Court will decide this situation. The Federal Supreme Court will definitely uphold the TSC's decision to revoke Claudio Castro's mandate and declare him ineligible. But then why does he file an appeal, Andre? It's to say that he hasn't been fully convicted yet, that it's still in the appeals process, and to buy some time. It's what I always tell you, it's just to buy time. The person needs time because they're already convicted. Then they try to use every possible legal maneuver and appeal just to buy time. So what happens? Rodrigo Bacelar is entering into a plea deal. And the Bolsonaros are desperate because the scheme in Rio de Janeiro is far-reaching, huge, it's a horrible thing. And soon the one who will be arrested is Claudio Castro, former governor of Rio de Janeiro, Flavio's political ally. Here, look. The domino effect. How Bacelar's possible plea bargain in the investigation into the Comando Vermelho threatens Flavio Bolsonaro. You can search for Rodrigo Bacelar with Flavio Bolsonaro. You'll find Flavio Bolsonaro at several events together with Rodrigo Bacelar. Even in private conversations, when they go off somewhere more secluded, everything is recorded, everything is filmed. So if he spills the beans and really exposes the whole criminal organization, I'm telling you right now, there's no way Flavio Bolsonaro isn't also involved in the schemes run by the criminal organization that divided up and took over Rio de Janeiro. Just so you know, when you're part of a political group and that political group wins the elections, like in the case of Claudio Castro, that group gets access to positions. Usually they divide up the positions. For example, there are 20 departments, so they divide them among the political group where these people appoint who will be the secretaries. For example, let me give you an example. Flavio Bolsonaro, he already has 2 secretaries who were appointed by him in Rodrigo Bacelar's government. And these 2 secretaries are already in jail. Exactly, 2 secretaries are already in jail. The 3rd secretary, who is the secretary of Procon, he just last week, the week before last, he was the target of searches and seizures. All 3 were appointed by Flavio Bolsonaro. Since it's from the same political group, he's the head of certain departments where he appoints whoever he wants to the positions. Do you understand? They work for the same political campaign and group, sharing responsibilities. So, there's no way Flavio Bolsonaro isn't part of this criminal organization. And there's involvement with militias, with the Red Command, with bid rigging, with money laundering, with embezzlement, with corruption, and several other situations that are under investigation. And it's interesting that there are 2 fields of investigation. There's one with Andre Mendonça. Unfortunately, Andre Mendonça doesn't inspire much confidence in me. And there's another one that's in Minister Alexandre de Moraes' office. There are 2 lines of investigation. The one with Alexandre de Moraes is specifically related to the militia and to the Red Command. The one with Andre Mendonça is more about issues against public administration, embezzlement, corruption, money laundering, etc. So these are 2 very serious and very grave situations. And soon it will lead to the arrest of the former governor of Rio de Janeiro, Claudio Castro. And I even believe in the arrest of Flavio Bolsonaro himself, not now, because of course it will also depend. Depending on what is found, on what is discovered there, he could be arrested at any moment. Yeah, that's a fact. But obviously they avoid an arrest right before the election. Even so, people don't say, right, that it's because they don't want the guy to win, that kind of situation. But depending on what was found, depending on the situation, the arrest could happen at any moment, right? But let's wait and see what happens with this here. Look, and Rodrigo Bacelar's plea bargain is really shaking things up behind the scenes in Rio de Janeiro. I believe Claudio Castro will be the next to be arrested. And from there, it's just going to go downhill. Judge and person under investigation together at the same political event, but no one talks about suspicion. There was the March for Jesus, right, this past weekend. And it was full of Bolsonaro supporters. Flavio Bolsonaro was there. And Andre Mendonça was there too. It's interesting that Bolsonaro supporters aren't mentioning suspicion, impartiality, or conflicts of interest here, right? When it's Alexandre de Moraes, anything related to Alexandre de Moraes, no. Alexandre de Moraes is a biased judge. Alexandre de Moraes can't judge. Alexandre de Moraes, that whole charade that the Bolsonaro supporters know very well how to pull off. And now, both of them there at the March for Jesus, and there was nothing about Jesus in it. How disgusting. How gross. But anyway, may I? Can I, guys? Isn't that grounds for recusal? Isn't that a conflict of interest? Yeah, right? You guys are such scammers, aren't you? These Bolsonaristas are worthless. When it's about us, it's conflict of interest, it's suspicion. But when it's about their side, no, it's a brother in Christ. From which day? From which day was it? Since when is Flavio a brother in Christ? He never was. He's just sweet talking the crowd to get the evangelical votes. He never was, guys. Do a little research and you'll find some serious stuff about Flavio. Yeah. Now, like, no, maybe Jesus' standards have changed, right? Maybe Jesus' standards have changed. Because, like, March for Jesus, and why is it a march? Which Jesus? And another thing, Jesus wasn't there, no. How disgusting, how gross. A whole herd driven and manipulated by religious fundamentalism, folks? How disgusting. And the two of them were there. Everything was there. There was, right? Everything was there. There were criminals, militia members, thieves, right, Flavio? Swindler, kickback scheme, pedophile. There was everything there except Jesus, right? Jesus wasn't at the March for Jesus? No. They forgot about the main guests and just focused on politics. So then even the Jorge Messias was there too, right? Because Jorge Messias is evangelical. So at that moment, he called Lula, right? Together with the leaders of the event, pastor, bishop, apostle. I don't really know what they are. My grandmother's is a pastor. Nowadays, there are bishops, apostles, even myths, right? Even myths already. Then he called Lula, right? Then Lula said, you're going because he's not going to use the worship pulpit saying it's a religious matter as if saying it's a political platform. Like Flavio and his father have used it, he's not going to use it. Can I give you some advice? Honestly, don't vote. Whoever uses it will use it. It gives faith to manipulate people to get people's votes. Don't vote. Don't vote. This kind of person is a scammer. I'm not saying that politicians can't have faith, guys. Having faith, having your religion, that's all right. But putting politicians on a worship pulpit, putting politicians at an event that should be for Jesus, that's manipulation. That's using people's faith and goodwill to manipulate them to use it for electoral purposes, for electioneering. Then that's not valid. Defending your faith, having your stance, even a political one, according to your faith, is one thing. But using political proselytism and religious fundamentalism is not acceptable. When you say that your political opponent is from the devil, is from the demon, that to me is a sin against the sacred. Because Jesus never preached any of that. Jesus didn't teach any of that. On the contrary. And that makes me extremely outraged. And I'm not going to lie. I'm disgusted by this kind of politician. Disgust. Do you know what disgust is? I'm disgusted by this kind of politician. I'll give you a positive example. Pastor Henrique Vieira. Pastor Enrique Vieira is a pastor and a federal congressman. He talks about his faith. He talks about Jesus. He asks, he preaches. But he doesn't bring politics to the worship pulpit. He states his political position. He states his ideological and religious position. And that's okay. Because in Brazil, people are free to express their thoughts. They have freedom of religion. And that's okay. Now, using this approach to demonize people, to influence your brothers and sisters, saying that just because someone is left wing, they're from the devil, from the demon, and so on. Guys, for God's sake, Jesus Christ never taught any of that. On the contrary. So, from the moment someone does that, to me, they're not even a Christian. She's using the gospel to get votes, to win votes, and often using people's lack of knowledge to manipulate them. And the saddest part of all is that many times she's using the Bible itself for that. For me, that's just the last straw. Because these people do that, and behind the scenes, they're negotiating positions, negotiating amounts, negotiating money. Right, Silas? A whole series of other benefits using religious fundamentalism to manipulate the masses, to get votes, to get support, to be able to run for election. And that's really sad. Pastor Henrique Vieira is a positive example of how you can be religious but still know how to respect people and not use the sacred to demonize your political opponent, to manipulate people to the point where they don't even think for themselves anymore. Because if people thought even a little when Flavio Bolsonaro went up to the pulpit of worship, now you have to ask me, worship of whom? Of Jesus, which it isn't. He should be booed. Or they're covering up for a corrupt person. Bolsonaro supporters always claim they opposed Lula due to the mensalão, corruption, and other reasons, even though all accusations against Lula have already been dismissed. Now they're backing Flavio Bolsonaro. Some of them, right? Even with this whole situation of Flavio Bolsonaro collecting money from Daniel Volcaro. So your problem was never corruption. Your problem is hatred of the left. It's religious fundamentalism, which mixes the holy, the sacred with politics and demonizes people. You start treating whom as what? That's fascism. That's extremely dangerous. Using religion. So your problem was never corruption. Your problem might even be your own prejudice against yourself. A bunch of arrogant poor people who say they're right-wing because they hate themselves because they're poor. He wants to be included and accepted by the right to see if they will accept him. And he ends up embarrassing himself so much, feeling so ashamed that he even stops thinking and can't see what's right in front of him. And he is nothing more than cattle used and manipulated and later discarded. You, poor person, will never be well regarded, never be included by the right wing. You will be used and manipulated. You won't truly be included. What they want from you is your vote and your labor to generate wealth so they can get even richer. And you, when you need it the most, you'll be in trouble because you'll find out about the pension reform they made for you, Bolsonaro and the right wing, in 2019. So we really need to face reality. And unfortunately, populism and religious fundamentalism have blinded many people. And that's really sad, right? You can follow any religion you choose, and that's fine. You can even have whatever ideological or political stance you want, and that's okay. Political pluralism is one of the foundations of our democracy. It's there in the Constitution as one of the foundations of the Federative Republic of Brazil. That's not the problem. The problem is the madness. The problem is fanaticism. The problem is blindness. Spiritually, the problem is the lack of love. The lack of vision. Did you understand? Politically, what is it, Andre? The lack of understanding. It's not even being able to tell anymore what's a lie and what's the truth. And accepting a corrupt person in the pulpit of worship. Even though he's not evangelical, not Christian, he never was. But anyway, everyone gets what they deserve. That's why I say it and I'll say it again. Lula will win for the fourth time because the people aren't fools. If you liked it, like the live stream, leave your comment. It's really important. Share it. Take a look at the first comment. All right. Take a look at the first comment. There will be important information there. I'll post the first comment for you now. Okay. Smash that like button. Hit it, hit it, hit it. Keep hitting it. Lula is a four-time champion. The rest is just whining. Bolsonaro